Okay, we are live. Okay. Good job, Venla. Your team did good. I loved your Barbara Barrett. Okay, we are live. Oh, now I can hear myself. Hold on. Let me shut that down. Okay.
And with computer audio when you're ready.
Hi, Sage. Okay, I'm going to mute myself.
This doesn't, oh, there.
Remember to smell the rose, blow out the candle. Deep breaths. You all are going to do great.
Janelle, I have a question about the YouTube. How long are they available for afterwards?
Let me ask Isaac. Hold on.
Okay.
I think forever, as long as we keep up the channel.
Okay. How long are you planning to keep up the channel?
I was going to ask you and Angela how long you wanted me to keep it up.
Okay. Yeah, maybe at least maybe a good couple weeks.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Let me ask Isaac though and confirm. Hold on.
All right.
Yeah, they'll stay there for indefinitely until we take down the channel. So yeah, we can talk about, you know, what our date will be when we take it down. But I think it'll be good. The kid, you know, they can rewatch and rewatch and rewatch.
That's good.
Amy, just so you know, your name is still Amy.
Okay, we're just making sure that this is the right trial that's live streaming. That's why you see me all like talking and pointing and stuff. Okay, we've got just a couple minutes. I just wanted to let you know, we're just waiting for our administrator. And I think that we might, yeah, there we go. We have our two other jurors and I think we have all of North State. Caleb Monti, are you there? That's you? Okay, good. I'm just making sure I forwarded you that link real quick, making sure you got it. So I think we have the teams here. We're just waiting for our administrator. Hey there, I'm just testing the audio real quick on this, so you'll just hear my voice. I'll let our teams know that Mrs. Shank and myself, we are going to black ourselves out. Even though we are watching and we're part of the Zoom meeting, we'll take ourselves out so that you can see more clearly all of the participants. So right now we're just waiting for Mr. Beauchamp to come on.
And could the jurors please mark that they are jurors?
Oh, yes. Adam, you have, oh, and Robin. So just Tim, can you mark that you're a juror? Oh, I don't know where, I texted Mr. Beauchamp, and then let's, oh, there he is. There he is. Okay, we are all here, Mr. Beauchamp. Both teams are here, and the judge is here, and all jury members are here.
Okay, well, this is round two, and we have going on for round two. This is Folsom versus North City, commencing at about 10:30 and going up to 11:45. So that's an hour and 15 minutes. Let's get round two started. This goes for you, bailiff.
Okay. All rise as the Superior Court of Sacramento County is now in session. The Honorable Judge Randy Merritt presiding. God save the state and this honorable court.
Good morning, everyone. The matter before us today is a criminal trial for first-degree murder. And murder is the killing of another person with malice aforethought, either express or implied. And malice is the wrongful intent to injure another. The bedrock principle of the United States legal system is that the accused is innocent until proven guilty. And the state alone bears the sole burden of proving both that a crime was committed and that this particular defendant committed that crime. That proof must be beyond a reasonable doubt. If the state proves that the defendant is more likely than not to have committed that crime, you must find the defendant not guilty. But neither must the state find that the defendant did the crime by proving it beyond a shadow of a doubt. The standard that you must abide by is beyond a reasonable doubt, which is whether or not a reasonable person using reasonable rationale would hold any question whether the defendant did the criminal acts. With that in mind, bailiff, what is the matter for today's case?
The matter for this case is murder. The matter of the case is murder.
And this is the case of the state versus Barrett. So the court is now in session, and we have an indictment before us with a first-degree murder charge. The first order of business is to enter a plea for that charge. Ms. Barrett, are you in the courtroom?
I am
How do you plead?
not guilty.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett. Counsel, are there any motions in limine or any other pretrial motions before us?
There are no pretrial motions.
Okay, we're going to proceed with the opening statements. And I'd like to remind everyone that your microphone should be on mute, except for the attorney who is actually making that opening statement. Is the state ready?
Yes.
Then you may proceed.
May it please the court, your honor, and ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My name is Laura Langford, and these are my co-counsels, Ms. Allison Friesen and Ms. Sage Hansen. Today, you will hear from the defendant, Barbara Barrett, who could not control her anger and in turn planned and murdered her husband. The issue in the case today is the defendant got a gun and practiced shooting earlier that day, planning to murder her husband. Then, after Mr. Barrett came home, she continued to carry out her plan by threatening him, saying, "You'll be sorry," and then later shooting him 5 times. Today, you will hear from the Barrett's afternoon housekeeper, Lee Porter. She will testify that she saw Mrs. Barrett target practicing in the backyard on the afternoon of the murder. She will also testify about how she saw Mrs. Barrett come running after Mr. Barrett with a gun, and that he was running away from Mrs. Barrett while she was shooting him. You will also hear from Officer C.M. Cheney, who will further explain the details of the murder. She will explain to us how Barbara Barrett was read her Miranda warnings and how she was clearly angry at her husband, even though he never threatened to hurt her in any way. We will also show that the shooting was no accident. Our last witness that you will hear from is medical examiner Joe R. May. He will show how Mr. Barrett was continually shot in the back and was even shot in the back of the head while he was lying on the ground. He will also explain about how Mr. Barrett had to have been 2 or more feet away from the gun when the first shot was fired. Through exhibit number 1, the police report, C.M. Cheney will explain how she was met at the scene of the crime by Lee Porter. Using exhibit number 2, the diagram of the house, Officer C.M. Cheney will show that Mr. Barrett was running away from Mrs. Barrett while she was shooting him. She will also explain to us how the diagram is a relevant depiction of the crime scene. Dr. Joe R. May will show us, using the record of the medical examiner, that Barbara Barrett shot and killed her husband. Through exhibit number 6, the Tootsie letter, we will show how Mr. Barrett planned on leaving Mrs. Barrett for a woman he referred to as Tootsie. We will show, through exhibit number 8, the confession with the officer's warnings, the inconsistencies between Barbara Barrett's witness statement and her confession. Using exhibit number 9, Barbara Barrett's witness statement, we'll prove how Mrs. Barrett planned her husband's murder. Altogether, we will prove through our trustworthy witnesses and our reliable evidence that Barbara Barrett could not control her anger and in turn murdered her husband with malice aforethought. We want the court to find Barbara Barrett guilty of murder.
Thank you very much. Defense, would you please make your opening statement?
Your Honor, my name is Caleb Manti, and I shall be making the opening remarks in this case. Allow me to introduce my co-counsel, Joshua Kahn. Mrs. Barrett did not murder her husband. She was a victim of her husband's abuse for 10 years. She was beaten over 35 times by him. She was beaten so bad that she passed out and was hospitalized. She tried to reach out to her minister, her counselor, and the police for help, but no one would help her. Finally, on the night of the incident, when her husband took off his belt, she was sure he was going to kill her. She had no choice but to defend herself from her husband to save her own life. On the night of the incident, Mr. Barrett came home around 9 p.m. He announced his divorce to Barbara before they both went to dinner that Lee Porter had served up. Barbara was understandably upset at what her husband announced. John told her to leave the room. She went into the living room and John followed her with his belt in his hand. Later, when Officer Sam Cheney arrived, John Walker Barrett was found dead. The evidence in this case will show that Barbara Barrett defended her life from her abusive husband in self-defense. Our first witness will be Danny McGuire. He has had 17 years of experience as a psychologist, interviewing and collecting data from abused and battered women. He will testify that Barbara was beaten about 3 to 4 times a year, and in total, over the Barrett's marriage, more than 35 times in her 10 years of marriage. He will tell the court that sometimes the beatings were so harsh and destructive, Barbara Barrett was sometimes not able to leave her bed for days. He will also inform inform you that Barbara's reaction to her husband's divorcing her could not have been controlled. The only thing that could have been done to control her was something as powerful as the sun itself. Our final witness, Barbara Barrett, a poor abused woman, she too will testify about the horrors of her home. She will tell about being beaten with a belt and how she, through Mr. Barrett, was going to once again violently beat her and even kill her. She will tell the court that she has been worried about John's love and attraction to other women. Members of the jury, don't listen to the demands of the plaintiff, saying that Barbara has murdered her husband out of her own self-interest against her husband. The conclusion is simple. Barbara Allen Barrett was in fear for her life, so she did what she had to do, what anyone would do when threatened of their life. She defended herself. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. And at this time, I'd like to ask the state to begin their case.
Your Honor, I would like to call Lee Porter to the stand. I think so.
Would the bailiff swear in the witness?
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to the court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and age.
My name is Lee Porter, and I'm 47 years old.
Have you ever been in trouble with the law, Miss Porter?
Well, once back in 1979, I was arrested because some lady I worked for said that I stole money out of her purse.
Did you take the money?
Of course not.
What did you plead in court?
I pled guilty.
And why did you do this?
Well, you see, I couldn't afford to hire my own personal attorney, so I got a public defender who advised me to plead guilty, so I would only put on probation for a short period of time, and I could move on with my life.
What is your relationship to the Barretts?
I'm their housekeeper.
How long have you been in housekeeping occupation, Miss Porter?
I've been a housekeeper for my whole life, so I guess almost 30 years now.
How long have you worked for the Barretts?
I've worked for them for 6 months.
And when do you work for them?
I work Wednesday through Sunday from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. Though sometimes I do work like an extra day, so like I have more time off for a holiday.
Would the Barretts ever tip you?
Well, not directly, but when the day Don died, Mr. Barrett said that I could take some loose change that he had for my fundraising for local children's hospital. He said he didn't have time to count all them pennies, nickels, and dimes.
Did you ever hear the Barretts argue?
Well, yes, they did argue quite a bit.
Have you ever witnessed Mr. Barrett physically hurt Mrs. Barrett?
No, they only ever argued.
And have you ever seen any bruises on Mrs. Barrett?
No, I can't say I have.
Have you ever seen signs that Mrs. Barrett was being hurt? For example, did she ever limp or randomly wince in pain?
You know, I have never seen Mrs. Barrett look like she was hurt. She always seemed perfectly healthy to me.
Where were you on the night of December 18th, Miss Porter?
I was working for the Barretts at their house.
What did you see Mrs. Barrett doing right before Mr. Barrett came home?
Well, you see, she was pacing up and down the hallway, ranting about how Mr. Barrett always came home late.
Were the Barretts arguing that night?
Yes, and Mrs. Barrett seemed very emotional and angry.
Did you hear Mrs. Barrett say anything before she entered the living room?
Well, you know, I did hear her say, "You'll be sorry," to Mr. Barrett.
And what did you hear after that?
I heard 3 loud noises, sounded like a car backfiring, you know, starting to leave so much I almost dropped a real fine dish.
What did you do after hearing these noises?
I went into the dining room to see what on earth was going on out there.
And what did you see in the dining room?
I saw a terrified Mr. Barrett limping into the room, all bloody like, and then Mrs. Barrett ran in right after him with a big old gun in her hand.
Where did you go after seeing Mr. and Mrs. Barrett?
Well, I ran back out through the back door in the kitchen,
Did you ever return to the house?
Well, yes, because I stopped hearing the gunshot firing, and I knew someone had to call the police, and I knew Mrs. Barrett was in no state to do that.
So did you call the police?
Yes, and the officer arrived a few minutes later.
Miss Porter, have you ever seen Mrs. Barrett with a gun before?
Well, earlier on the day of the shooting, I did see her enter through like a side door she never uses.
Did you hear anything before seeing her?
Well, I heard these like noises. It sounded like gunshot, same noises I think that I heard later that day, with the shooting and all.
Who was home at the time you saw Mrs. Barrett?
Only me and Mrs. Barrett were home then.
Have you ever seen Mrs. Barrett with a gun other than this one time?
No, I've never even seen a gun in the house before.
Thank you, Miss Porter. No further questions, Your Honor.
Your witness, counsel.
Is it true that you have worked your life as a housekeeper?
Yes, it is.
Is it true that you worked for the Barretts for about 6 months?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
What do you have to say, counsel? Defense counsel, do you have a response to that?
Yes. I've asked if she has worked for the Barretts, not how long have you been working as a housekeeper?
She's already answered the question about 6 months working for the Barretts in the direct. So just move on to something that hasn't been asked before.
Your general work hours for the Barretts are from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. Wednesday through Saturday, yes?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
I'll sustain it.
On one of your work days, did you hear a scream from Mrs. Barrett?
Well, I think, but it was only that one time,
Was anyone else at the house that night besides the Barretts and you?
Well, I don't think there was.
On the 18th, did John Barrett arrive at the home around 9 p.m.?
Yes, sir.
In your statement, you said exactly, I didn't see nothing more until about 10 minutes later when I came back before the police officer arrived. Do you testify this to be true?
I do.
Is it true that in your witness statement, you stated that you do not like to bother other people and get into their business?
Well, sir, if I got into everyone's business, I would have been fired many times. Not good to pick sides like that, sir.
You seem to add a lot of opinion and detailed information in your witness statement anyway. Do you agree?
I don't know.
Objection, relevance.
You have any counter to that, counsel?
No.
I'm going to allow him to develop it a little bit to see if there is any relevance.
You also say in your witness statement that you have hardly have ever been in trouble with the law. Do you deny this?
I do not.
Yet you pleaded guilty when you stole $100 from your employee's purse. The person that already pays you. Do you deny
I'm going
this?
to sustain the objection. She's already talked about that.
Do you realize that you could have been sentenced to 1 whole year in prison for this crime, and instead you paid triple the amount you stole?
Well, see, I don't know much about the law. You see, that's why I listened to my attorney.
Thank you. No more questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lee. You may step down. And prosecution, you have any other witnesses to call?
Your Honor, I would like to call Tim Chaney to the stand.
Ask the bailiff to swear in the witness.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to the court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Good morning, Officer Cheney.
Good morning.
Could you please state your name, age, and occupation?
Yes, ma'am. I'm Officer Cheney, and I'm 29 years old. I work at the Milton Police Department as a loyal police officer. I also have lots of experience because I work part-time as a security guard at First Bank and Trust Company.
Do you have a college degree, Officer Cheney?
Yes, I do. I have an advanced degree in criminal justice.
How long have you been working for the Haddonfield Police Department?
For 7 long years, ever since 1982. I've sacrificed my life every day, and I've had years of constant training.
Were you working hours you don't normally work on the night of December 18th, 1988?
Yeah. I've absolutely I was, and I've spent 9 hours at Campbell State University, and I've had numerous occasions to be called to the scene of a homicide.
Were you accompanied by a partner on the night of Mr. Barrett's death, Officer Cheney?
No, I wasn't actually. My partner Ralph Simmons was unfortunately sick, and so I decided to just cover for him.
Have you taken any time towards an advanced degree, Officer Cheney?
Yes, I have. I've spent 9 hours at Campbell State University to fully complete my degree in criminal justice.
Are you often dispatched to the scene of a homicide?
Yes, ma'am. I've had numerous occasions to be called to the scene of a homicide.
And are you properly trained on how to deal with a homicide event, Officer Cheney?
Absolutely. I've been trained to preserve physical evidence, take measurements of physical proximities important to the case, and to interview witnesses, even suspects.
Did you create a report for the case?
Yes, I did. I accurately recorded everything, and I included pieces of evidence.
Permission, Your Honor, to enter exhibit number 1 into evidence.
As soon as I see it. Does the bailiff have it to be able to show me?
Bailiff, this is administrator. Can you please show the evidence?
Yes, sir. What evidence number would you like?
Number 1.
Any objections? So admitted.
Were you met at the Barrett residence, Officer Cheney?
Yes, I was. Lee Porter, who kindly let me in, and but looked pretty darn freaked out and was crying and hysterical, let me in there.
Did the reportee then direct you to anything?
Yes, she did. She pointed me to a body, which I identified as a deceased male lying face down in the dining room area.
What was the significance of any evidence found near sofa number 1?
Well, from our observation, there was a ripped open envelope titled Tootsie lying right next to the sofa. It was where Mrs. Barrett had apparently been seated.
Was there anything found in the deceased's hand?
Yes, there was a blood-stained letter, which was crumpled up in his hand.
What did you do with the letter, Officer Cheney?
Well, I removed it and tagged it as evidence like I always do.
Permission, Your Honor, to enter exhibit number 6 into evidence.
Permission granted.
Are there any objections from the defense counsel? No objections being heard, so admitted.
Is this the exact same letter you found in the deceased's hand?
It is.
Could you please read sections 41 through 48 on the first page of your police report, Officer Cheney?
Yes, ma'am. So the deceased came home around 9:00 p.m. He's a prominent criminal defense attorney with the firm of Barrett and Williams in Haddonfield. He left his briefcase by the door and went into the living room. He and the actor had an argument because the deceased was planning on divorcing the actor and moving out the next day. Apparently, the actor had found the letter the deceased has written to his premier and had confronted the deceased with it. This confrontation probably occurred after dinner, or at least at that point, because the letter was found with bloodstains on it, clutched in the deceased's hand when he died. The envelope in which the letter had been sealed was found on the floor next to sofa number 1.
Thank you. Could you please read sections 58 through 69 on the second page of your report?
I will. According to the housekeeper, Lee Porter, the deceased and the actor had an argument in the living room and then went into the dining room to eat dinner. During dinner, Porter heard the deceased say that he still wanted the divorce and that he was glad she knew everything. The actor then left the dining room and the deceased followed. Prior to leaving the dining room, the actor said that the deceased would be sorry for his actions. From the placement of the bloodstains, it is probable that the deceased got her gun and shot the deceased in the left arm as he sat on sofa number 2. The deceased began to run towards the dining room and the actor shot him again, this time hitting him in the left leg at thigh area. A third shot was fired and missed the deceased and was recovered in the wall next to the door between the living room and the dining room as shown on the scene diagram. The actor then followed the deceased into the dining room and shot him twice more in the back and once in the back of the head for a total of 6 shots fired.
Thank you, Officer Cheney. How many bullets could the gun hold?
Well, 6 bullets, and they were all fired at the deceased.
Were you able to locate Mrs. Barrett, Officer Cheney?
Yes, I was. She was hiding and had locked herself in the downstairs bathroom and would not come out when I told her I was an officer of the law.
Did she eventually come out for you?
Yes, she finally unlocked the door and came out.
After Mrs. Barrett came out of the bathroom, did you ask her a question about the murder?
Yeah, well, the only question I asked her was if her husband had threatened her in any way before she shot him.
What did she respond to this one question?
Well, she clearly stated that he had not threatened her in any way.
Do you recall reading Mrs. Barrett her Miranda warnings?
Yes, I do. Well, I mean, I must have at the time, but it was a month later from when the shooting had occurred, but I've worked numerous shifts since then.
Do you believe you read Mrs. Barrett her Miranda warnings, Officer Cheney?
Yes, I strongly do believe that I read it to her because it has been a repetitive habit of mine to do so for many years.
Could you please tell me about obtaining Mrs. Barrett's witness statement, Officer Cheney?
All right, well, I never threatened her or forced her to sign or answer any of my questions. I never made any promises of benefits or even a lighter sentence just because she gave a statement. And in the end, she indicated that it was true and correct and that she was signing it completely voluntarily.
Did you create a house diagram?
Absolutely. I took appropriate measurements of the house and accurately recorded and drew in everything, even the evidence.
Permission, Your Honor, to enter exhibit number 2 into evidence.
Permission granted.
Any objections? So admitted.
Was there a back door leading from the kitchen outside?
Yes, but when I made the drawing, I didn't add in the door.
Another witness, Lee Porter, the housekeeper, has testified that there was a back door. Why didn't you include it in your diagram, Officer Cheney?
Well, another officer actually took her statement when we got to the station, so I didn't know that she mentioned the back door. Also, I didn't add in the back door in the diagram because it wasn't involved in the murder, and there were no bloodstains near it at all.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Defense counsel, any questions?
Yes. Is it possible that since your partner was not working with you that night, that you were doing things your partner usually does and that you were overworked and clumsy?
No, sir. I am an officer of the law.
On your police report, you wrote that the victim was shot in the left leg, correct?
That is true.
Was he shot in the right leg, or the left leg, or the right leg? Because the coroner report clearly states right leg.
Yes, it also depends on the angle you're looking at. If you're looking from behind, he was shot.
We're trained to preserve evidence, correct?
Excuse me, can you ask the question again?
You're trained to preserve evidence, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'm going to allow it and let her develop it. Let him develop that area.
And yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Does this include times and events?
It depends on the situation, but for homicides, I include everything that I'm trained to do.
You were called to the scene at approximately 9:50 p.m. and arrived at 9:57. Is this accurate?
This is.
You also note the time of 9:42 in your witness statement. You said that 9:50 was the approximate time and not exact. These three times are quite close together. Could you have mixed these times up incorrectly filled out your incident report?
No, I could not have.
Do you try to find, oh wait. When you arrested Mrs. Barrett, did you read her Miranda rights?
I believe that I did, but it was a month after the shooting.
Was she aware of her rights?
I believe that she was.
No further questions.
Thank you. And Detective Cheney, you may step down. Plaintiffs, do you have any further witnesses?
I would like to call Medical Examiner Joe Armay to the stand.
Bailiff, will you swear in the witness?
I will. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to the court and jury in this trial shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Good morning, Dr. May.
Good morning.
Can you please state your name, age, and occupation?
My name is Dr. Joe May. I am 51 years old, and I am a medical examiner.
Dr. May, how long have you been a medical examiner?
I have been a medical examiner for 19 years at Haydenfield General Hospital.
How many bodies have you examined?
I have examined countless bodies.
What college did you attend?
I attended Harvard University.
What are your degrees?
I have a bachelor's degree from Harvard University. I also have a medical degree from Harvard University. I have a 4-year pathology residency at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland, and I have a 2-year fellowship in forensic pathology at Haydenfield General Hospital.
Your Honor, I would like to establish Dr. Joe Armay as an expert witness.
There are no objections, so granted.
What was the name of the deceased?
The name of the deceased is John Walker Barrett.
Dr. May, did you record all of your findings in a record?
Yes, I did, as I do all of my examinations.
Permission, Your Honor, to enter exhibit number 5 into evidence.
Permission granted.
I need to see it. Got it. If there are no objections, it is admitted.
Dr. May, what was the cause of death?
The cause of death was the gunshot wound to the back of the cranium. My findings indicate that the deceased was lying face down on the floor.
What time did you deem John Walker Barrett dead?
I deemed John Walker Barrett dead at 10:15 p.m. on December 18, 1988.
Who is the investigating officer?
The investigating officer is C.M. Channing.
Who is the suspect?
The suspect is Barbara Allen Barrett.
Dr. May, what evidence was submitted to the laboratory?
The evidence submitted to the laboratory is bullet and fragment of skull given to Milton Police Department.
What was the manner of death?
The manner of death was homicide, the gunshot wound to the back of the cranium.
In your expert opinion, could the deceased have been running away from Barbara Barrett when the second shot was fired?
Yes, the bullet wound number 2 that entered the deceased's body was in the upper portion of the right leg, indicating he had his back to the suspect.
What does the absence of powder marks on the body mean?
The absence of powder marks on the body means that the gunshot fire was more than 2 feet from the deceased.
In your expert opinion, Dr. May, could the deceased have been attacking the person holding the gun when the first shot was fired?
No. Gunshot wound number 1 had no powder marks, indicating that the gun was fired more than 2 feet away.
In your expert opinion, could Barbara Barrett have been lying on the ground at any time during the shooting?
No.
How many gunshots were in the deceased?
There were 5 gunshot wounds in the deceased, but 6 shots were fired.
How many gunshots entered at the front of the body?
1 gunshot wound entered at the front of the body.
How many gunshots entered at the back of the body?
4 gunshot wounds entered at the back of the body. According to my expert opinion, this means that the deceased was running away from the suspect.
No further questions.
Defendants, do you have any questions?
Yes.
You may proceed.
Your Honor, allow me to enter into evidence exhibit number 3.
Objection. Relevance.
Could you explain what the document is?
It's a diagram of the body.
What is the purpose for the introduction of the evidence?
To state that John was shot in the right leg and not the left leg.
Going to allow it? Go ahead, bring it into evidence.
Permission granted.
Counsel, you may proceed with it in evidence.
Your statement says that John Barrett was shot in the right leg, correct?
Yes.
Are all the markings on the body correct?
No, it is just an estimate.
No further questions.
Okay, Dr. May, you may step down. Prosecution, do you have any further witnesses?
The prosecution rests.
Very good. Defense, please call your first witness.
Your Honor, I would like to call Dana McGuire to the witness stand.
Bailiff would swear in the witness.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
What is your name?
My name is Dana McGuire.
What is your profession?
I am a practicing psychologist.
How many years have you been in your profession?
17 years and counting.
What is your education?
I have a Bachelor of Arts and Master's degree in psychology with a focus on sociological and psychological dysfunction in families. I graduated with highest honors.
Tell me about your training program you have developed.
I have helped to develop a training program with the local police department.
What are some books and articles you have written?
I have written several articles, including Living in Hell, the Life of a Battered Woman.
How many women have you interviewed?
I have interviewed over 300 and collected significant data on over 500 abused and battered women.
Your Honor, I would like to establish Dana McGuire as an expert witness.
Any objections? With no objections, granted.
Would you say that you have extensive knowledge in the field of abused and battered women?
Yes, most definitely.
What, in your expert opinion, is the definition of abused, battered women?
An abused and battered woman has physically been affected by a man against her will.
You mentioned different stages of abuse in your statement. Briefly describe the events in each stage.
The beginning stage consists of many minor and verbal beatings. Each beating creates more tension between the couple. Everything finally ends with either the couple divorcing or one killing the other.
How many different stages of the abuse must a couple go through to be a complete cycle?
3 stages. Each stage has its own event to signal it is beginning.
Why do people have a difficult time understanding why women stay in an abused relationship?
Mainly because these women and men have not gone through something significant enough for them to know the pressure and emotions women may feel in these situations.
Please describe the anger and depression abused women feel.
Women in this situation feel they cannot leave their husband or whoever they are married to, feeling that if they fail at their relationship, they fail at life completely.
In your interviews with Barbara, what was your impression of her situation?
She was going through a very general case of being abused and battered, of being an abused woman.
How many cycles must a couple go through to be classified as a battering couple?
3 complete cycles.
Your Honor, no more questions.
Very good. Prosecution, do you have any questions for the witness?
Yes.
You may proceed.
Good morning, Dr. McGuire.
Good morning.
Your current occupation is psychology, isn't it?
This is correct.
Yes or no? Isn't it true that battered women are very angry?
Yes.
Yes or no? Isn't it true that their anger increases with each battering cycle?
That is true.
You have met with Mrs. Barrett a few times, right?
I have 3 total times.
But never before her husband's death, correct?
Can you repeat the question?
But never before her husband's death, correct?
That is not correct. That is correct, sorry.
You have testified in many trials concerning abused and battered women, haven't you?
I have, many.
So you've had practice with this before, right?
I have definitely have practice.
And Mrs. Barrett is paying you to testify in court today, isn't she?
That is true.
Your fee for appearing in court is $150 per hour, correct?
That is correct.
And does the fact that you are being paid by Mrs. Barrett influence your testimony today?
No, that is not true. I solely do it to support the abused woman.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
All right, the witness may stand down. Thank you. Defense counsel, do you have any other witnesses to call?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to call Barbara Barrett up to the witness stand.
Ask the bailiff to swear in the witness.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the evidence you shall give to this court and jury shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name.
Barbara Allen Barrett.
Where was the first time you and John Barrett met?
We met at an alumni function.
How long were you married to John?
I've been married to him for 10 whole years.
How did John treat you?
He was loving, but would suddenly turn around and become very violent toward me.
Did he have any bad habits?
John
He
had
had
John
Go
had
ahead.
developed a bad habit of drinking heavily at social events.
In your witness statement, you mentioned that he physically hurt you many times. Please explain.
Yes, he had beaten me many times to the point where I even had to stay in my bedroom for days to recover.
How often would John beat you?
3 to 4 times per year.
Did you seek help with the violence from anyone?
I did. I sought help from the violence from my minister, the police, and doctors, but no one would help me.
Had John cheated you before? And if so, how?
He spent long hours at his office spending time with other women.
On the night of the shooting, what made you scared of John?
He came at me after dinner with a belt in his hands. He had used this belt many times to hurt me before, and I was sure he was going to hurt or kill me.
When you were taken to the police station, the police obtained a witness statement from you. Were you aware of your rights at that time?
I was not.
Thank you. No more questions, Your Honor.
State's Counsel, do you have any questions for the witness?
Yes. Good morning, Mrs. Barrett.
Good morning.
Mrs. Barrett, you were questioned by Officer C.M. Cheney on the night of the murder. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did Officer C.M. Cheney ask you to retell the events of the evening, didn't she?
Yes.
Permission, Your Honor, to enter Exhibit 8 into evidence?
Permission granted.
With no objections, it's entered into the record.
Mrs. Barrett, is it true that in your confession you stated that Mr. Barrett wanted a divorce because he wanted to marry someone else?
Yes.
Mrs. Barrett, is it true that you gave a witness statement to Officer C.M. Cheney?
I did.
Permission, Your Honor, to enter Exhibit 9 into evidence?
Permission granted.
Just waiting to see it. Any objections? No objections, it's entered.
Is it also true that in your witness statement, you stated that you didn't know why Mr. Barrett wanted a divorce?
Yes.
Mrs. Barrett, in your confession, you said, quote, I don't remember much of anything after seeing him come into the living room. Is that true?
Yes.
Then is it also true that you stated in your witness statement, quote, John came into the living room with a belt in his hands. I thought he was going to choke me and kill me?
Yes.
Mrs. Barrett, are you aware that in your witness statement, you stated that C.M. Cheney never told you what your legal rights were?
I am.
Then is it true that in your confession, you agreed that you were warned by C.M. Cheney by signing the confession?
Yes.
Mrs. Barrett, is it true that you own a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Did your dead husband own a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol?
No.
Is it true that on the day you killed your husband, you were seen coming in from the backyard with a gun?
Well, that's what Lee Porter says.
Like a yes or no answer, please.
Yes.
Mrs. Barrett, can you please read line 80 in your witness statement starting at about 3 weeks?
Yes. Just that line?
Yes.
About 2 weeks before our wedding, after all the invitations had been sent and preparations made, John came over to my house after work.
Is that line 80? Or Sorry, I must have a different one.
Oh, sorry. You're right. About 3 weeks before John's death, he came to me and said he thought our marriage was in difficulty.
Thank you. Mrs. Barrett, is it possible that you could have been emotional or bitter when he told you this?
It is.
Is it true that you saw your husband with a letter on the night of the murder?
I don't know what you're talking about.
The letter was clutched in the deceased's hand. Are you sure that you never saw a letter?
I don't know.
Permission, Your Honor, to revisit exhibit number 6.
I can see it, and then tell me what it is. Could you tell me what it is, counsel?
It's the Tootsie letter. It was already entered during CM Cheney's direct exam.
Okay, go ahead.
Mrs. Barrett, can you please read line 16 in the Tootsie letter starting at please?
Oh, sorry. Please do not think that you have stolen me away from her. Our marriage has been dead for a long time, and I do not wish her ill.
Can you please read to the end of the paragraph? Sorry.
I just cannot live with you, my wonderful child, and to think I could have spent the rest of my days in this unhappy marriage had I not met you.
Mrs. Barrett, does reading this make you emotional or angry?
Yes.
When your husband told you that he wanted to marry someone else, is it true that you became emotional or angry?
Well, he did not.
Objection, Your Honor.
What's the objection?
Opinion.
Asking for what her state of mind is, and she is the only person who can actually testify to her state of mind. So I'm going to allow the question.
Can you say the question again?
When your husband told you that he wanted to marry someone else, is it true that you became emotional or angry?
Well, he never told me he wanted to marry someone
I'd
else.
like the yes or no answer, please.
Yes.
Has it ever made you emotional or angry when John hurt you?
Yes.
Is it true that when you saw John sitting on the couch with another woman, you ran out upset and emotional?
Yes.
Having witnessed your husband with other women, is it possible that you have built up anger towards your husband?
It's possible.
On the night of the murder, did John touch you in any aggressive manner before you shot him?
No, but he did come at me with a belt in his hand.
Yes or no answer, please.
No.
Did you find it necessary to shoot him a 5th time after you already shot him 4 times and he was lying face down in a pool of blood?
I did.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Does the defense have any further witnesses? Counsel for the defense, do you have any witnesses?
No.
Well, then we're going to proceed with the opening statements. And I would like to ask everyone, please, once again, to have it on mute, except for those attorneys who are delivering the opening statement. Is the state ready?
Yes.
Then you may proceed.
May it please the court, Honorable Judge Merritt and esteemed members of the jury. Today we have presented you with a trial concerning a woman who has broken the law. As the state of South Carolina, it is our job to uphold the law and bring justice for the murdered John Walker Barrett, who has lost his life because his own wife could not control her anger and therefore planned and murdered her husband. On December 18th, Mrs. Barrett practiced shooting, got angry at John Barrett throughout the evening, grabbed the gun she'd placed in the living room for this exact reason, and shot John Barrett multiple times. While he was actively trying to run away from her, she continued following him, even to the point of him falling over, helpless, face down on the floor. John had no intention and no physical capability of hurting her. However, she still intentionally shot a bullet directly into his head, killing him. State Statute 16-3-10, murder defines murder as the killing of another human being with malice aforethought. This has been clearly demonstrated by the testimonies of our witnesses. Lee Porter, the suspect's housekeeper, testified to how she saw Mrs. Barrett with a gun earlier in the day of the shooting. Mrs. Barrett had no past history of using guns, and this was no new fun activity or hobby. This was intentional. To be able to fulfill her plan of killing her husband, she knew that she would need some practice using a gun, so she went out shooting to improve her aim. Miss Porter has also testified to hearing the Barretts argue that night. Mrs. Barrett seeming especially heated and mad. Mrs. Barrett was also heard saying to John in a threatening tone, "You'll be sorry," immediately before she went into the living room, grabbed her gun, and began shooting him. Medical examiner Joe Armay's expert testimony shows how John could not have been attacking Mrs. Barrett before or while she was shooting him. This proves how Mrs. Barrett could not have been acting in self-defense, only fulfilling her already thought-out plan. He has also testified that Mrs. Barrett stood directly over John while he was lying helpless on the floor. She knew that he was unable to hurt her, but she still shot the last bullet directly into his head, ending his life. Officer Cheney testified to hearing Mrs. Barrett directly state that her husband never threatened her in any way on the night of the shooting. However, in her statement, she states that John was coming at her with a belt, about to choke and kill her. Do you really believe that Mrs. Barrett could have been defending herself from a man who hadn't even come close to touching her? If he was about to be violent towards her, wouldn't she have told the officer so? The opposing counsel has openly testified through psychologist McGuire how Mrs. Barrett has had increased anger towards her husband. Mrs. Barrett herself has also testified to having strong emotion and anger towards her husband throughout their marriage, including on the night of the murder. This anger in Mrs. Barrett led her to plan and kill her husband. The opposing counsel has tried to prove to you how Mrs. Barrett was battered by her husband. However, our witness, Miss Porter, who is at the Barretts most days of the week, shows how she had never seen any bruises on Mrs. Barrett. If Mrs. Barrett was actually hurt to the degree she claimed she was, there'd be bruises and quite obvious signs that Miss Porter would definitely notice. Even if Mrs. Barrett attempted to cover up her bruises, there'd be other signs that would be impossible to miss. For example, she might limp or wince in pain at random points during the day. However, neither of these things or anything similar were noticed by Miss Porter. Although Miss Porter wasn't specifically looking for signs of hurt or abusiveness, she would definitely notice all the signs that would be left if Mrs. Barrett was hurt as badly as she claimed she was. There's also no hard evidence showing that she was actually battered, only testimony coming directly from the suspect herself. We implore the jury to find Barbara Barrett guilty as charged for the offense of murdering her husband, that on the night of December 18th, 1988, she unlawfully and with malice aforethought shot and killed John Walker Barrett. Thank you.
Thank you very much, counsel. Defense counsel, please make your closing argument.
May it please the court. Barbara Barrett did not murder her husband. She has been accused of voluntarily killing her husband, John Barrett. The most she did was kill her husband out of self-defense, despite the neglect and unfaithfulness, never mind the abuse. Barbara stayed committed to her husband, whom she loved. As we have seen today, Barbara Barrett was beaten over at least 30 to 40 times over the course of her 10-year marriage to John Barrett. She sought help from the police, her parents, the doctors, and her minister, but none of their solutions stopped her husband from abusing her. One of the beatings took her to the hospital. You have heard from Dana McGuire that Barbara had most definitely gone through a classic case of being a battered wife. She could not control her actions. Lee Porter was a witness to at least one of the beatings because she heard Barbara scream after an argument. Members of the jury and court, I ask you to consider and understand Barbara Barrett did not murder her husband, but perhaps purely tried to protect herself as she saw her husband come into the living room with a belt, thinking John would once again begin another abuse cycle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, counsel. Thank you very much for the witnesses. I'd like to excuse you all while we take a recess for a while so I can consider all of the evidence and the arguments that have been made. Thank you very much.
All right. Round two just completed. Thank you very much, attorneys. And jurors, you have the evidence in front of you to make your evaluations. We'll take a break. We'll close this off in a minute. We'll take a break. And for scoring and evaluations, I want to bring to your attention just a slight out of sequence in the closing arguments on prosecution. Should have been last, the defense. So it's just out of sequence. I don't think it'd change the evaluations because it doesn't differentiate on those sheets, but just be aware that jurors, you may have caught that and got a little confused. I didn't catch it, so thank you, Director LaRock on that. But so we'll close this one off and we'll score things out and return again later on. We also go into a lunch break, so we'll come back right about 1 o'clock. Any comments, directors, that you want to make?
Well done, everyone. Awesome. Strong.
Thank you very much.
Great lunch.